The lonely mining outpost drifted at the edge of human space, its metal shell gleaming under the light of distant stars. Inside the quiet control room, engineer James Walker sat with his feet propped on the desk, reading through the day's maintenance logs. His dark blue uniform was stained with engine grease, and his rough hands showed the marks of someone who spent more time fixing machines than pushing papers. The silence broke with an unexpected beep from his control panel. James dropped his feet to the floor and leaned forward, his brown eyes narrowing at the strange readings on his screen. A signal was coming through, but not on any normal emergency channel. "That's odd," he muttered, adjusting the frequency controls. The signal was unlike anything he had heard before. It pulsed with a rhythm that almost seemed musical, rising and falling in patterns that made his skin tingle. James checked the outpost's logs. No scheduled ships were due for the next 2 weeks. The nearest human settlement was 3 days away at full speed. According to protocol, he should report the signal and wait for the proper authorities to investigate. He glanced at the family photo on his desk, his parents standing in front of their small farm back on Earth. They had always taught him to help others in need. What if someone was out there, running out of air or fuel, while he sat here waiting for bureaucracy to run its course? The signal crackled again, and this time he caught something that made his heart skip. Buried beneath the strange patterns was what sounded like singing. Beautiful, haunting notes that no human voice could make. James stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the vast emptiness of space. His small maintenance shuttle sat in the docking bay below, fully fueled and ready to fly. It wasn't much, just a basic craft meant for fixing broken satellites and clearing space debris, but it was fast and reliable. "Station log, update," he spoke clearly to the computer. "Unknown distress signal detected at coordinates marked 227 to 84,119. Signal appears non-human in origin. I am," he paused, knowing his next words could cost him his job. "I am preparing to investigate." The computer beeped in acknowledgement as James quickly gathered his emergency gear. He pulled on his spacesuit, checked its systems, and loaded some basic tools into a carry bag. The suit was an older model, scratched and worn, but he maintained it carefully. It had saved his life more than once during tricky repair jobs. As he walked through the empty corridors toward the docking bay, James recorded another log entry. "I know protocol says to wait for backup, but someone out there needs help, and they might not have time to wait. If anyone reviews this log, well, I hope you understand." The maintenance shuttle systems came to life under his experienced hands. He had spent countless hours working on its engines, and he trusted it more than any fancy rescue ship. The docking bay doors opened slowly, revealing the star-filled blackness beyond. James took a deep breath and guided the shuttle out into space. The strange signal grew stronger as he followed its source, leading him away from the familiar mining routes into uncharted territory. After an hour of careful flying, his sensors picked up something ahead. At first, it looked like a large piece of space debris, but as he got closer, his eyes widened. The object was clearly a ship, but not like any he had ever seen. Its hull seemed to shimmer with faint colors, almost like the surface of a soap bubble. The alien ship was damaged. Large tears ran along its side, and it spun slowly in space, its systems clearly failing. The musical distress signal was coming from inside. James checked his suit one last time and prepared his tools for boarding. Fear and excitement mixed in his chest as he guided his shuttle closer. He knew he was probably breaking a dozen regulations. He knew he might be flying into danger. But someone was in trouble, and that was all that mattered. "Well," he said to himself as he prepared the docking sequence, "Mom always said I had more courage than sense." The airlock opened with a hiss, marking the moment when James Walker's ordinary life as a mining outpost engineer changed forever. The airlock on the alien ship opened with a strange musical tone, completely different from the harsh mechanical sounds James was used to. He floated through the entrance, his helmet lights cutting through the darkness. The inside of the ship was beautiful, despite the damage. The walls seemed to be made of some sort of crystal that caught and reflected his light in rainbow patterns. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. "This is Engineer James Walker. I'm here to help." A soft blue glow caught his attention. It came from what looked like the ship's control room. As he pushed himself closer, he heard something that made him freeze. A quiet song, the same haunting melody from the distress signal. The room was a mess. Broken equipment floated everywhere, and deep marks scored the walls. They looked like claw marks, but bigger than any animal James had ever seen. In the center of the room, trapped under a fallen piece of equipment, was the source of the blue light. James's breath caught in his throat. The alien was humanoid, but clearly not human. Her skin gave off a soft blue glow, and what looked like delicate crystal formations grew from her shoulders and arms. She opened her eyes. They were like opals, shifting with countless colors. "Stay back," she said in perfect English, though her mouth didn't move. The words seemed to form directly in his mind. The beasts might return. "You're hurt," James said, pushing forward anyway. "Let me help." He reached the fallen equipment and examined it. "I'm going to lift this. It might hurt for a moment." The alien watched him with those strange, beautiful eyes as he positioned himself. James braced his feet against the wall and pushed with all his strength. The equipment moved slowly but surely, floating away in the zero gravity. "Thank you," she said, her glow brightening slightly. "I am. The closest translation of my name in your language would be Rain." James pulled out his medical scanner. "I'm James. Can this scan you? I don't know if it works with your, biology." Rain made a sound like tinkling crystals. A laugh, he realized. "It will work. My people, the Luminary, are not so different from humans in our basic structure." As he checked her injuries, Rain explained what had happened. Her people were researchers, studying ancient ruins in this sector. They had found something in suspended animation. Living creatures that seemed to be made of living darkness. The creatures were supposed to stay frozen, safely contained for study. But something went wrong, Rain said, her glow dimming. "They woke up. They feed on energy. Any kind of energy. They killed." Her voice broke off, the musical tone turning sad. "I am the only one left." James finished treating her wounds with his emergency medical kit. Nothing seemed too serious, but he could tell she was weakened. "These creatures," he asked, "where are they now?" A deep rumble shook the ship. Rain's glow flickered in fear. "They're here," she whispered. "They never go far from energy sources. Your shuttle's power called them back." James looked around the room quickly, his mind racing. "Can you move? We need to get to my shuttle." "Yes, but—" Rain grabbed his arm. "You don't understand. They're nearly invisible until they strike. They move through space as easily as swimming. No normal weapons hurt them. Running might make things worse." Another rumble, closer this time. James looked at the claw marks on the walls, then at the frightened alien he'd just rescued. He made his decision. "Then we don't run," he said, pulling out his tools. "Look, I'm just a simple engineer, but I've learned that everything in the universe follows certain rules. If these things eat energy, maybe we can use that against them." Rain stared at him. "You would stay and fight, even knowing what they can do?" James gave her a small smile. "Well, I didn't come all this way just to leave you here." He started pulling parts from his repair kit. "Now tell me everything you know about these creatures. Every problem has a solution. We just need to figure this one out." In the darkness beyond the control room, something moved. Something that was darker than the darkness itself. James saw it first, a patch of space that was somehow darker than the surrounding darkness. It moved like oil and water, flowing through the doorway of the control room. His helmet lights seemed to bend around it, creating strange shadows that shouldn't exist in zero gravity. "That's a shadow maw," Rain whispered, her blue glow dimming even further. "They named themselves in my mind before they attacked. They're proud of what they are. The creature grew larger, spreading across the ceiling like a living shadow. James could finally see its rough shape, something between a manta ray and a wolf, but with edges that kept changing. More disturbingly, he could feel it watching them, even though he couldn't see any eyes. "The tools," James said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "You said they eat energy." He pulled out his plasma cutter, a simple tool meant for repairing hull breaches. Its power cell hummed as he turned it on. The shadow maw reacted instantly. It twisted in space, moving with impossible speed toward the plasma cutter. But that's what James had hoped would happen. At the last second, he pushed Rain behind him and fired the tool directly at the creature. A high-pitched shriek filled their minds as the plasma beam hit the shadow maw. The creature recoiled, its edges burning with a strange purple fire. It wasn't enough to kill it, but the beast retreated, flowing back through the doorway like water down a drain. "It worked," Rain said, her glow brightening with hope. But how did you know?" James kept his eyes on the door, plasma cutter ready. Simple engineering principle. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. They eat energy, so maybe too much energy at once would hurt them. Like trying to drink from a fire hose. A sound like distant thunder rolled through the ship. Rain's crystal formations trembled slightly. "There are more coming," she said. "Many more. They feel the energy from your shuttle." James thought quickly. They needed a plan. His plasma cutter had hurt the creature, but its power cell would run dry long before they could fight their way to his shuttle. He looked around the damaged control room, his engineer's mind taking stock of what they had. "Rain," he said, "your people use crystal technology, right? I noticed all the crystalline structures in the ship." When she nodded, he continued, "Do they conduct energy? Could we use them to make some kind of weapon?" Rain's eyes widened with understanding. "Yes, the ship's crystals are grown to channel and amplify energy. That's how we power our systems." She floated to a broken panel and pulled out a long crystal shard. "But we need a power source." James unclipped the power cell from his spacesuit. Without it, he'd have only 30 minutes of emergency oxygen. "Will this work?" "No." Rain reached for his hand. "You need that to survive." "We need to survive the next 5 minutes first," James said firmly. He handed her the power cell. "You know crystal tech. I know basic engineering. Let's put them together and make something these shadows won't expect." They worked quickly, James following Rain's instructions to connect the crystal shard to his power cell. She sang softly as she worked, and James watched in amazement as the crystal actually responded to her voice, reshaping itself slightly. The thunder sound grew closer. In the doorway, 3 patches of deep darkness began to form. The shadow maws had returned, and this time they were hunting as a pack. "Done," Rain said, holding up their makeshift weapon. The crystal glowed with energy from James's power cell, pulsing in time with Rain's lingering song. "But James, your air supply." James took the crystal weapon, noting how it felt warm in his hand. 25 minutes of air left, so let's make them count." He grinned at her, ready to show these things why they shouldn't mess with engineers. The first shadow maw lunged forward, its dark mass spreading like spilled ink through the air. James raised the crystal, which now hummed with the same musical tone as Rain's voice. Time to see if their plan would work, or if they'd just made themselves an even more tempting target for the energy-hungry beasts. The crystal weapon fired a beam of pure energy, transformed by Rain's crystalline technology into something the shadow maws had never encountered before. The beam hit the first creature with a sound like singing glass, and the shadow beast split apart like smoke in strong wind. Behind it, the other 2 shadow maws pulled back, seemingly confused by their packmate's fate. It worked. James couldn't keep the excitement from his voice, but his suit's warning system beeped. 20 minutes of air remaining. Rain touched his shoulder. "We must reach your shuttle now." While they're hesitating, her voice in his mind carried worry. "The weapon drained half your power cell with just 1 shot." James nodded, They pushed off from the control room wall, moving as fast as they dared through the crystal corridors of Rain's ship. James led the way, holding the crystal weapon ready, while Rain's soft blue glow lit their path from behind. They were halfway to the airlock when Rain suddenly grabbed James, pulling him into a side passage. A moment later, a massive shadow maw flowed past their hiding spot. This one was bigger than the others, its darkness so deep it seemed to eat the light around it. The Alpha, Rain whispered in his mind. It led the attack on my ship. It's intelligent. James checked his air supply. 15 minutes. They couldn't afford to hide. How far to the airlock? 2 more corridors. But James, Rain's glow pulsed with concern. The Alpha is between us and your shuttle, and it's not alone. As if responding to her words, more shadow maws began appearing in the corridor, gathering around their Alpha. The creatures seemed to be learning, staying just far enough away that the crystal weapon would be less effective. James looked around. They were in some kind of storage room. Broken pieces of crystal technology floated everywhere. An idea struck him. Rain, can you sing to these crystals too? Make them respond like you did with our weapon. She nodded slowly. Yes, but... Oh, her eyes lit up with understanding. Yes. Quick, help me gather the bigger pieces. They worked fast, James holding off the occasional curious shadow mob with the weapon while Rain sang to the crystal shards. Her voice was beautiful, making the crystals vibrate and glow faintly. Under her guidance, they created a circle of crystal pieces around themselves. 10 minutes of air left. Ready, Rain said. But James, this will drain your power cell completely. Once we start, we can't stop. James grinned behind his helmet. Sometimes the best engineering solution is the crazy one. He connected his power cell to the crystal circle. Besides, I trust your singing. Rain began to sing aloud now, her voice rising in a complex melody. The crystals lit up one by one, creating a network of light around them. The shadow maws, drawn by the energy, began to move closer. The Alpha came first, its massive dark form filling the corridor. Behind it, at least a dozen smaller shadow maws gathered, their edges blurring together in anticipation. Now, James triggered the power cell. Energy flowed through the crystal circle, amplified by Rain's song. The crystals erupted with light, creating an expanding sphere of pure energy. The shadow maws, unable to resist such a huge energy source, rushed in from all directions. But this was no normal energy. Rain's song had changed its nature, making it toxic to the shadow beasts. As they tried to feed, the shadow maws began to break apart. Even the Alpha, trying to retreat too late, was caught in the burst. When the light faded, the corridor was empty. No shadows moved in the darkness. 5 minutes of air. Run, James shouted. They pushed off the walls, racing through the now clear corridors. They reached the airlock just as James's suit gave its final warning beep. Rain helped him into his shuttle, her glowing hands quick and sure on the controls. As the engine hummed to life, she turned to him. That was either very brave or very foolish. James, finally taking his helmet off for a fresh breath of shuttle air, smiled. In my experience, the best plans are usually both. But as they pulled away from her ruined ship, Rain's worried voice came into his mind. We survived, yes. But James, the shadow maws that escaped, they're heading toward your mining outpost. James pushed his small maintenance shuttle as fast as it could go. The mining outpost was still an hour away at top speed, and he knew the shadow maws could move much faster through space. How many escaped? He asked Rain, who sat in the co-pilot's seat, her blue glow reflecting off the shuttle's controls. 5, including one smaller Alpha. Rain's crystal formations trembled slightly. They'll be drawn to the outpost's power core. It's much bigger than my ship's was. James thought about the 100 people living and working at the outpost. Most of them were engineers and miners like him, Good people who wouldn't stand a chance against creatures they couldn't even see properly. "We need to warn them," he said, reaching for the communication controls. But Rain caught his hand. "No." Her opal eyes were wide. "The shadow maws are drawn to energy, remember. Active communications will lead them straight to us. They're angry now, hunting. If they catch us." James pulled his hand back from the controls. She was right. They were safer running dark, using only the minimum power needed for life support and engines. But that meant they couldn't warn the outpost. Rain's voice in his mind was gentle. "You're worried about your people." "They're not just my people," James said, checking the engine readings again. "They're my friends. Mike in hydroponics, who grows real tomatoes. Linda, who fixes the communication arrays and loves old Earth movies. Tom, who—" He stopped, forcing himself to think like an engineer. "We need a plan." Rain nodded, her glow brightening slightly. "The shadow maws have one weakness we know of. They can't resist high energy sources. They must feed when they find one." "Right," James said, beginning to understand. "And we know they can be hurt by energy, if it's the right kind." He looked at their empty crystal weapon, then at Rain. "Could we do what we did before, but bigger? The outpost's power core." Rain's eyes lit up. "Yes, if I could sing to it, change its energy like we did with the crystals. But James, I'd need to be inside the core chamber. And the shadow maws would sense me singing. They would come straight for me." James smiled grimly. "Good. That's exactly what we want." He pulled up the outpost schematics on the shuttle's small screen. "Look, the power core is here, in the center. These are maintenance tunnels. And this," he pointed to a small section, "this is the auxiliary power control." Rain studied the screen. "You have a plan." "A crazy one," James admitted. "But sometimes those are the best kind, right?" They spent the rest of the journey preparing. James taught Rain about the outpost power systems, while she explained more about how her singing could change energy. They had one chance to get this right. The outpost came into view, its metal hull gleaming. Everything looked normal, but James felt a chill when he saw strange shadows moving across the solar panels. "They're already here," Rain whispered. James docked his shuttle as quietly as possible at a maintenance airlock. Inside, the outpost corridors were strangely dark. The shadow maws must have already started feeding on some of the power systems. Warning the whole outpost would cause panic, James said as they moved carefully through the shadows. And panic would just attract them faster. "We need to do this quietly." They reached a junction where they would need to split up. James would go to auxiliary control, while Rain headed for the core chamber. Before they separated, Rain grabbed his hand. "James," she said, her glow pulsing softly, "what we're attempting. There's a high chance that whoever is in the core chamber when the shadow maws come won't survive." James squeezed her hand. "I know. That's why I'm going to the core chamber, and you're going to auxiliary control." "No." Rain's mental voice was sharp. "My singing is needed in the core. It has to be me." "Then I guess we'll both need to survive," James said with a small smile. "Because I'm not leaving you alone in there." In the darkness around them, shadows began to move with purpose, drawn by the sound of Rain's voice in their minds. The final battle for the outpost was about to begin. The core chamber hummed with power, its massive crystal arrays pulsing with blue-white energy. James and Rain stood at its center, watching shadows gather at the edges of the room. The shadow maws had found them, just as they'd planned. "Ready?" James asked, his hand steady on the control panel. Rain nodded, her own glow matching the rhythm of the core's pulse. "Remember, once I start singing, you must time everything perfectly. Too early, and the energy won't be converted properly. Too late. And we all die," James finished. "No pressure." He managed a small smile. "At least we got everyone to the secure lower levels first." It hadn't been easy, triggering a routine maintenance evacuation without causing panic. But James knew enough people at the outpost to make it happen quietly. Now only he and Rain stood between the Shadow Maws and enough power to make them nearly unstoppable. The Alpha Shadow Maw entered first, its dark mass filling the doorway completely. Unlike the others, it moved slowly, cautiously. James could feel its intelligence, its suspicion, but the power of the core was too tempting to resist. "Now," James whispered. Rain began to sing. Her voice filled the chamber, crystal clear and hauntingly beautiful. The core's crystals responded, their light changing from blue-white to a rainbow of colors. The Shadow Maws pressed closer, drawn by the transformed energy. James watched the power readings carefully. Everything had to be perfect. Too much power, and they'd blow up the whole outpost. Too little, and the Shadow Maws would survive. More shadow beasts poured into the room, their darkness making the air itself seem thick. The Alpha held back, watching, but its lesser companions couldn't resist the modified energy Rain was creating. Power at 60%. James called out. 70. 80. Rain's song grew stronger, her crystal formations glowing brightly. The core's crystals were fully in tune with her now, the entire chamber becoming a massive version of their makeshift weapon from before. The Shadow Maws began to feed, drawing in the modified energy. But something was wrong. The Alpha suddenly reared back, as if it understood the trap. With shocking speed, it lunged toward Rain. James didn't think. He threw himself forward, pushing Rain aside. The Alpha's attack caught him instead, its darkness wrapping around his body like ice-cold smoke. He felt it trying to feed on his suit's energy, on his body's own electrical impulses. James. Rain's song faltered for just a moment. "Keep singing," he managed to say through gritted teeth. Almost there. The power readings were nearly at maximum. The lesser Shadow Maws were already beginning to break apart, unable to process the transformed energy. But the Alpha still held James, and he could feel his strength fading. With the last of his energy, James reached up and yanked off his helmet. "Hey, ugly," he shouted at the Alpha. "Eat this." He slapped his helmet's power cell against the Alpha's surface, the small but concentrated energy source, directly touching the shadow beast, made it release him with a psychic shriek of pain. "Now, Rain." James fell to his knees, gasping in the thin air. "Do it now." Rain's song reached its crescendo. The core flared with blinding light, transformed energy cascading through the chamber like a tidal wave. The lesser Shadow Maws dissolved instantly. The Alpha tried to flee, but it was too late. When the light faded, the shadows were gone. Really gone this time. But the chamber was filled with smoke from overloaded circuits, and the air was getting thinner by the second. Rain ran to James, who was struggling to breathe. Her glow expanded, surrounding them both in a bubble of clear air. "I can help you breathe," her voice said in his mind. "But the air system will recover in about 10 minutes. James finished weakly. "Automatic. Reboot. Standard safety protocol." Rain held him as he caught his breath. "You could have died," she said softly. James looked up at her with tired eyes. "Couldn't let my singing partner down." He smiled. "Besides, what kind of engineer would I be if I let the shadows eat my outpost?" Outside the core chamber, lights began to come back on as systems rebooted. They had won. But as Rain helped James to his feet, they both knew their adventure wasn't quite over yet. 3 days after the battle in the core chamber, James stood at the outpost's main viewing window. His chest still hurt where the Alpha Shadow Maw had touched him, but the doctor said he would recover fully. Below him, workers were attaching new crystal arrays to the outpost's exterior, a gift from the luminary fleet that had arrived yesterday. Admiring the view, Rain's familiar voice touched his mind. She floated up beside him, her blue glow now strong and steady. "Just thinking," James replied. "A week ago, my biggest worry was fixing broken satellites. Now we have your people installing technology that's centuries ahead of ours." The luminary ships were beautiful, their crystal hulls catching starlight like massive jewels. After Rain had sent out a distress call using the outpost communications, they had arrived faster than anyone thought possible. Their scientists were fascinated by how James and Rain had defeated the Shadowmoss. The council was impressed, Rain said, not just with the victory, but with how you protected your people, how you worked with me despite our differences. She paused. They've asked me to stay here, to help establish formal relations between our species. James turned to look at her. And what did you say? I said yes, but only if my partner agrees to help. Her opal eyes sparkled. The council is creating a new joint research team. We'll study ways to combine human engineering with luminary crystal technology. They need someone who thinks creatively. Someone crazy enough to fight shadow monsters with mining tools. James grinned. Exactly. Rain's crystal formations chimed softly, her version of laughter. The door behind them opened, and Linda from communications rushed in. James, you need to see this. They followed her to the communications room. On the main screen was a message from Earth Central Command. James read it and whistled softly. They're naming the new Joint Science Division after us, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. The Walker-Rain Initiative for Cooperative Technologies. That's not all, Linda said excitedly. Look at the personnel assignments. James scrolled down and his eyes widened. He and Rain were being given their own research ship, a hybrid vessel combining human and luminary technology. Their mission would be to explore the frontier between their two civilizations, helping both species learn from each other. I don't know anything about running a ship, James protested. Rain touched his arm. You know how to solve problems, how to trust new friends, how to be brave when it matters most. The rest can be learned. James looked around the communications room, at the place that had been his home for so long. I'll miss the outpost, he admitted. Oh please, Linda laughed. You've been itching for bigger challenges for years. Besides, someone needs to make sure our new alien friends don't forget that sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Speaking of simple solutions, Rain said, the council wants to know how you knew the helmet power cell would hurt the Alpha Shadowmaw. James shrugged. Basic engineering principle. Concentrated energy in a small area has more impact than dispersed energy. Like the difference between a gentle push and a punch. And that's exactly why we need you, Rain said. You see things differently. You make connections we might miss. Looking out at the luminary ships again, James thought about everything that had changed in just 1 week. He had faced monsters from darkest space, made friends with an alien who sang to crystals, and helped bridge the gap between two civilizations. When do we start? He asked. Rain's glow brightened. As soon as you're ready. Our ship already has a name. They're calling it Last Shield. James smiled at the name. It felt right somehow. Well then, he said, I guess we should start packing. There's a whole lot of space out there waiting to be explored. As they left the communications room together, James couldn't help but think that sometimes the craziest decisions, like investigating a strange distress signal against protocol, turned out to be the best ones. He had followed his heart, trusted a stranger, and found not just a new friend but a new purpose. The stars seemed brighter somehow, full of promise and possibility. And somewhere out there, new adventures were waiting for a simple engineer and his crystal singing partner.